disagree that music could exist without the math. I don't think nothing exists without the math. The math is the foundation of everything in existence, even if we don't see it. The math, being able to see the math is like when Neo in the Matrix stopped seeing the images and they actually start seeing the code. The code is there. It's what produces the images.
Your ability
which
to
came
do
first?
math is different. Your ability
the math came first. The code produced the matrix. Neo saw the images first, just like you heard the music first. But once Neo got to a higher stage of development, he gained the ability to see the code. And the code is what gave him the ability to manipulate the reality of the matrix. Why he gained the ability to fly and to stop bullets in time, because his ability to see the code and actually become one with that.
We grew up in the hood like most black folks. Little did they know it comes gorillas from the south coast, breaking them boots out, leaving them broken in many pieces. Black brain for not 5, expression posse going to switch with this revolutionary tactic. Them flips up out of my mattress. I practice pro-blackness, not to say I'm prejudiced, what's in the darkness. No, I'm not suicidal, but I'm dying for my people. No, I'm not confident, I distinguish good from people. I use the world on grounds, align my mind to burn from ignorance. I cut away my perm, I got strong, some can't deal with this mentality. Thinking I'm weak, I'm not no gangster. It won't be televised how many times my posse pull the trigger. Lord, oh Lord, am I the devil too, or am I really the son? To the throne, son, the fuck is true. Image of you, a portrait that I could not never see. Dumb as I may be, I never go, I kamikaze G, genocide.
Once again, this is the Panther 48. We coming to y'all with part 2 of the bill and discussion that we were doing called the balance of being. So once again, you got me, myself, Brother Sight, calling out of Texas. We got the chairman of the San Diego chapter of the Black Panther Party, Brother War, calling out of California.
Out to the people, folks.
And we got Brother E, our official Minister of Information Emeritus, and one of the original members of the Dallas chapter New Black Panther Party, calling out of Florida.
You ready to rumble? Because it's going down, Sight. I'm taking you out, kid. I'm coming for you.
We coming back to a discussion that we started on the last video, where we talked about what we dealt with spirituality, religion, or simply higher levels of consciousness from a revolutionary perspective. And one of the last things that we left out on was the difference between, or the can I say, the
friction,
for lack of a better phrase, the differences between emotional thinking and logical thinking and where they play their place. And one of the last things that we said in the last video is, I believe that there is never a time to make a decision emotionally. There's never a time to make an emotional decision. And the reason I say that is because emotions lead us to the decision that we have to make, without a doubt. But the decisions themselves need to be made with logic. They need to be rationalized. They need to be ratioed through. And the reason I say that is because I think that it's very important. Matter of fact, I'm not even gonna go into it just yet. I'm gonna let y'all jump in and add on if y'all need to at this point.
It ain't gonna matter because you're going down. Go ahead, boy. Do the scientific egghead stuff, the boring shit. Get that out the way, and then let me go ahead and fight.
All right. Well, the first thing I would say, just even talking about that, is I would like Psych to recognize the envelope that's involved between the logic of emotion as well as the emotion of logic. And I say that because you have to see how the balance comes into play when you're dealing with both of these things. And so I look at that in terms of addressing it from the standpoint of the association of emotion and logic is referred to as directional reasoning, whereas the unification of emotion and logic is sound reason, and the replication of emotion and logic is light reason. So when you talk about a decision, you have to look at a decision as being the end product or result of. So I think I last discussed it from the standpoint of talking about things as it applies to polarity. So when I say that is getting into the fact that when you look at it from an extreme perspective, whether you're talking about something being done from a logical perspective or a position, or from an emotional position, then I think the problem is that it's a combination. And I think kind of sort of that's what Sykes getting at, but he is addressing it as a stage. So I just feel like the point should not really be a battle or a fight between what is logic or emotion, and it shouldn't also be an extreme, because I believe, to give you the perfect example, like earlier was talking about algorithms. So let's just go into just use an example of artificial intelligence as it applies to that. Man creates machine. Man creates machines for the sake of trying to replicate perfection in itself. In doing so, once the machine takes over, if the machine is operating from purely logical perspective in terms of its output, why would machine at that point in time see the use for man? Therefore, the most logical thing to do is to eradicate the human species out of the equation. That would be the logical thing to do. But I pretty much can guarantee that humanity is not inventing artificial intelligence for the sake of let artificial intelligence create its demise and ultimately destroy it. So is that decision to even go into the realm of artificial intelligence based on logic, or is it based on emotion? So you see, from that perspective, it's about dealing with the balance, or it's about dealing with the idea of merging the two and creating an environment to where you are utilizing both to a benefit. So we're talking about logic and emotion at that point. But to go to either extreme and to work your decisions based on either extreme, I think you're doing a disjustice to both of them. So that's why I said I like Sykes to just even go into the difference between the logic of emotion and the emotion of logic.
Let me clarify what I'm saying, because I'm not talking about one extreme of the other. I'm talking about positions. And what I mean by that is this: we got arms, we got legs. Which one are more important? I don't think either is more important than the other one. They all have both parts of the body have a position that they're supposed to play. Can you walk on your hands? Yes, you can. You can't walk as effectively as I can with my legs, though. So when we start recognizing what position these different body parts play, we put them where they're supposed to be at, and we utilize them correctly. And that's what I'm talking about what I'm dealing with when I deal with emotion and logic. See, logic is the thing that we're supposed to make decisions with. Emotions, if we're driving in a vehicle, if you look on your dashboard, you'll see all kind of stuff. You're about to run out of gas. You're about to run out of oil. Your tire PSI is too low. You see all kind of little things on the dashboard that lets you know that something needs to be done to keep the vehicle running effectively. That's what emotions are to the human being. But you don't start trying to steer the car with the dashboard. If you do that, you're going to crash. You steer the car with the steering wheel. And that's what logic is to the human being. And that's what I'm saying. That's the point I'm making. And we've always known this. If you look at ancient Kemet, ancient Africa, let's look at the Herma-Ket, what most people commonly call the Sphinx. This in last video we talked about religion, where they spoke to us religiously in the true sense of what the word religion mean. And Lee John, as I broke it down last video, they spoke to us religiously through this monument. This monument is telling us, is basically giving us logic, the head that's sitting on top of the Sphinx or the Herma-Ket, over the passionate or emotional body, which is the lion that's prostrated. This is the symbolism of this monument. It is that emotional animal nature being placed into submission by that logical king mind state. We see the same symbolism in ancient Greece, which they got from ancient Kemet. We see the symbol of the Minotaur and the Centaur. The Centaur is a man with a horse's body, with a horse's lower part, but a man's top body. And the Minotaur is a man's body with a bull's head. Symbolically to the ancient Greeks, this represented the animals having full control over the human body. And with the Centaur, it represented the opposite, while we have this animal body, this passionate nature is being controlled by this logical body. In ancient Kemet, we have Haru defeating Set. We have Haru defeating Set, but he doesn't kill Set. He regulates Set to run in Lower Kemet under his authority. Haru represents that king mind, that logical mind, while Set represents that passionate nature. And Set is needed because Set, that passionate, violent nature of Set, is needed sometimes in the battle of life, but it has to be under subjection. It has to be subjugated. It has to be. It doesn't do a good job when it runs the country. When it's running the country, as we saw in Lion King, and Set being in the form of Scar, the hyenas run rampant, and all the food is gone, and the entire land is desolate. But when we put that part of our nature in subjection to that higher mind, to that God consciousness, when we put it there, then it plays its part properly. And this is the point. This is the point that I'm making when I'm talking about emotion and logic.
Well, I want to add to that and still make sure that we're given both equal footing, because that in that same example that you're using, that's basically the cycle of night and day. So you never want a situation where there's day 24 hours just as well as you wouldn't want night 24 hours. So it has to do with the balance of both of them. And I'm not hearing you give examples of the emotional balance. I keep hearing you talk about the logical balance. Where is the emotional balance in that?
I just gave an example when I said emotion was the dashboard. It tells us what's going on, what's offending us, what we need to respond to, what we need to adjust. It gives us this. That's why it has its part. It has its position. I'm just saying that I truly don't believe that any decision that you ever make needs to be one based solely on emotion. I don't believe in that.
But that's where the issue comes in, because just like you were talking about the hair on my cat, it's not, the significance is not that the lower is submitted to or subjugated by the logical, the reasoning, or the higher thinking. Is that God man, that king man, comes in and balances the higher and the lower, because it's the balance, as opposed to one being subjugated by the other is not balanced. When you talk about the dashboard and all of that, what you're doing is relegating emotion to that of something that's in servitude to logic, which is not. Emotion is its own thing. If we look at the Matrix and go back and check out the Matrix, the Oracle was not a subject of the architect. She had her own role. And the goal of Neo was to balance what it was the architect was saying and what the Oracle was saying. As a matter of fact, and that's why War is asking for examples of an emotional decision. When Neo, when he's talking to the architect and the architect gives him a choice between two doors, save Zion or go save Trinity. Neo went and saved Trinity. He made an emotional decision. Logically, given his role and everything that was going on and what he was doing, he should have went and saved Zion, which is something I struggled at the time that the thing came out. Me and Ward went back and forth about it for weeks. But he made an emotional decision. He decided to save the woman he loved, because that was an emotional decision. So the question is, what, and if you approach it from if we're looking at these decisions being made and try to say that logic is the way to make decisions, we're automatically discounting the emotion and like I said, subjugating it and making it a role that is subservient to logic, when in reality, logic is one end of the pole, emotion is the other end. And if we're going to talk about balance, that it can't be logic is better, but they're on the same pole. That's not how poles work. They're opposites. So the role of man, woman, whoever, is to stand in the middle and to balance the two. There are times for more logic. It's never going to be strictly logic. That's just not going to happen. It's not going to be strictly emotion. It's going to be somewhere on that continuum. Our role is to balance the two. It's always balance. When we say decision, balance those decisions. A little bit logic, a little bit emotion. Balance the decision. Not taking information, which emotion is not how you take in information anyway. So there has to be a balance in between the two. And that's a difficult thing, especially for us, because, you know, I'm the same way. I need to understand the ABCs of how this works. You can tell me to do something a certain way, and I might remember, but if I understand the reasoning behind it, okay, I'm going to understand it. I'm going to be able to not only do what you said, but I'm going to be able to take that idea and apply it later on in other places, which is, you know, what they're supposed to do in the schools is teach us how to do that. They don't do that shit. But the reality of it is, the question why, you know, you mentioned why, knowing why something is a certain way it is. The question why is an attempt to find control. That's why we ask why. Why is this like this? Because we have this need to control a particular situation. And I think that when it comes to things, it's a male-female thing. It's experience and inexperience. It's logic and it's emotion. All of these things are the same thing. And we have to really drill down and examine the reasoning behind our reasons for doing X, Y, you know, ABC, whatever it is, in order to really understand the why of why we do things in a particular way. You know, if you've ever studied anything from Jung, Carl Jung, looks like Jung, but he talks about the animus and the animal. And the animus is so, yeah, y'all know that, right? We good with that, right? So animus is that right there. The animus is those masculine qualities, not male qualities, not a man's, but those active characteristics and qualities that exist deep within in the subconscious of the female, of the yin, because we all know the seed for the yang is in the yin and vice versa. So within the woman, there's this thing called the animus, which is all of these, you know, you talk about how you don't particularly care for manly qualities in a woman. Those, you know, the certain character traits that are just kind of a turnoff. I get that, I understand, most definitely. But if a woman doesn't address those particular things within her, that animus, they tend to come out because they're repressed. They come out in ways that she's not aware of. So being able to rectify, being able to embrace and integrate those characters and qualities and whatnot that are deep in her subconscious is key to her developing herself and being a full-fledged, not needing a soulmate, not needing to be completed, but being a complete woman. And the same is with the male. In the male, again, the animal, it's right there. It's those feminine or passive qualities that, especially with those of us in the movement, because it does us outwardly no good to show any type of passive characteristics whatsoever. No matter if it's Bobby or Malcolm or anybody else, we have to put forth the most masculine energy that we possibly can. But if we're going to get into really accepting and embracing those things on the emotional end, we have to recognize and acknowledge that that is a characteristic of the passive, that is a characteristic of the yin, that is a characteristic that we have to drill down into and accept. And if a woman in her past has had issues with males, particularly her father, it can affect her ability to integrate those active masculine, not man, not male, those active qualities that exist within her. She's going to fight it. She doesn't like it. She doesn't want it to be a part of her reality, even though it's there, whether she wants it to or not. Same is true for a man. If he's had issues with females in his life, then him integrating that animal, those feminine passive qualities is going to be very, very difficult. And like I said, for those of us within the movement, within struggle, have been doing it for a minute, integrating that feminine side can be detrimental. Integrating that feminine side can give you headaches because you're trying to go between what the world expects and what you actually want to do in regards to your own shadow work. So integrating that is a part of really being able to understand the why, really being able to understand the why as it applies to self, really being able to integrate one's more hidden, the subconscious that's back there, that's there, but it comes out in a messed up way because we don't integrate it consciously. Dig it. What? I got visuals. Y'all see that?
Yeah, we see those bars. I like them bars. What's up with it?
Okay, so we know that's what? Sheet music, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. What about this? You recognize that? You see that?
Yeah.
Frequencies.
Yeah.
So that's yeah, frequencies, but that's a mathematical representation, right? This, y'all not gonna know this, I know. This is actually a picture that John Coltrane drew.
Yep.
As a mathematical representation, as a mathematical representation of music. Now, none of them pictures I showed y'all, that shit right there, that don't blow your mind. That don't move you. That don't get you doing nothing. But
the circle of fifths, dude, the one that you said with John Coltrane, you have to really appreciate rhythm to be able to even come to grips with what that was.
But if I play the music, see that don't get you going. That don't get you hyped. That don't do nothing for you. But that will get your head bobbing. That'll get you moving. Why? Because this is the logic of music. This is the mathematics. What you heard is the emotion of music. So one doesn't exist without the other. And the better that they're balanced, cats like Coltrane and Miles and all of them would talk about the mathematics of music because it's there. They can write it down and say, yeah, this is the math right here. We wouldn't want to look at it. We want to hear it. We want to have the emotion. It's an innate part of who we are. And so that's why I say, if we're not tapping into that emotion of the thing, though there's a logic behind it, there's mathematics to it all. And you can look at the mathematics of the universe, but that does nothing to go out in the country and stand and look at the stars. That does nothing to have an actual experience with it and be involved. It's emotion that gives us that experience. And a lot of times that experience has to be leaned on for those decisions. And that's where we start getting into the experience and the inexperience. The experience is the mathematical,
Here's a problem.
Go ahead.
And I agree with like 96% of what you're saying, but I think you're missing something. Here, because I think what you're doing is the flip side of what y'all think I'm doing. And you're making emotion the primary thing over logic, even though you're saying balance, you're saying it, but you can hear it in your voice that you have a greater relationship with emotion than you do with logic. While you're a logical person, hold on. While you're a logical person, you can hear the emotional attachment that you have to emotion and not necessarily the logic. That's just a thing that got to be there. But, emotions though, when you look at the stars and when you smell the chocolate and when you hear them, I'm talking about you're passionate about expressing this emotional thing. If you think about it. Now, here's the thing though. And I'm not saying that the human being can exist without emotion. I'm not saying that. That's insane. And you're 100% correct. We would much rather hear that Dre Day beat than to read it on paper. But here's the thing. That mathematical equation that creates the beat has to exist for us to have the emotional experience with the beat. It has to exist. There's no way for that music to even come into being without that math, without the logic. You call it the logic.
The math can't come into being without the music that we hear. They exist simultaneously.
The math brings that into being.
No,
and there's a musician right there. The math brings it into being. So you telling me that the music popped up and then we just figured out, that made the math.
No, what I'm saying is they're opposites. One's logical, one's emotional. They can't exist without each other. One doesn't pop up and give birth to the other. That makes one in charge and one subservient.
So when a person,
like the chicken and the egg, they have to exist at the same time from the same start. Absolutely. You can't have name me an opposite where one of the opposites pops up before the other opposite. It's not possible.
See, I don't believe that logic and emotion are opposites. I don't believe that I can't finish. I don't believe that they're opposites of each other. I don't believe that they're the polarized opposites of each other. That's not being 100% honest. That's like saying a body and a shadow are the polarized opposites of one another, and that one cannot exist without the other. And that's not true. The fact is the shadow exists because the body exists. That's the fact. And the body existed before the shadow came into being. And this musician, he might not want to say it because he has that attachment to this, but he can tell you that math had to exist to create the sound. The sound didn't have to exist to create the math. The math had to exist to create the sound. Now, because you came into a realization of the math existing once you heard the sound, doesn't mean that hearing the sound made the math come into existence. Tell me how wrong I am, War.
Well,
math came into existence in an attempt to control and to describe the sound. They came in at the exact same time.
So they didn't. The math existed to produce the sound.
It's impossible.
How did the sound come into existence then? Where did the sound come from?
The sound is already there. Sounds do not dissipate. Sounds don't dissipate. They resonate. The math comes in and organizes sounds in a certain way, but the sounds are already there.
Well, you know what I'm saying. Now you being now.
Let me.
You know what I'm saying.
Let me add my part.
Yes, add your part, please.
I believe that. Let me just say this. What I hear basically being said is the math is basically our ability to deal with the interpretation of the sound. This is why I started off talking about association, unification, and replication. And when I said that, I referred to, and again, y'all refer to this as that egghead perspective, but I got to go there, and then I go back to what I was talking about. So the association of emotion and logic is that directional reason, whereas the unification of emotion and logic is sound reason. He showed us through pictorial concepts dealing with the cycle of the fifths, the sound reason. Now, the replication of emotion and logic is light reasoning. Now, in other words, you cannot have the harmonics that exist within that sound spectrum, which is what gets that emotion moving, without replication. And replication come in when you combine the two. This is why at the center of man is a woman, and at the center of woman is a man. And this is why I said the logic of emotion and the emotion of logic. See, so that's that overall point of view that we're talking about. And so then go ahead.
So which existed first, the math or the sound that got Eda jumping around, bouncing around?
The math is the interpretation of the sound. That's really what you're saying. The math is think of the math as a language. Math is a language. This is our ability. That's why I call it the replication from that standpoint. How do we reproduce that sound? It's no different than that sound being recorded and somebody else playing Coltrane's music. But see, now we're escaping and we're leaving the concept of emotion and logic. We get into a whole different subject matter now. But if we're talking about that, then now you're talking about, again, the ability to be able to unify, and then getting into the replication, which is the math of it. Whereas now I can break it down and I understand the physics and I understand how the properties operate. So therefore I'm able to replicate that. And I give y'all another example, which a lot of people, because they don't understand, I would say the aspects of wordplay or spell casting, never got this polarity opposite. We often, when we talk about higher conscious concepts, we often refer that as secrets. But then what a secret is your ability to take it in and deal with that. What are you talking about? Understanding, overstanding, understanding, and understanding. The point is taking that in. Now it becomes a secret. Now you become the holder of that information. So you're keeping secrets. But when it comes to the replication, what you are supposed to do next is turn that secret into a secretion. So the secret now has a secretion, which means it's able to replicate. So from that standpoint, it's producing. So then you get into the two stages. That's why earlier I was asking you, are you referring to emotion and logic as stages of reasoning versus being, that's why I kind of looked at it as, I wasn't sure if you was talking about it from polarity perspective or you was talking about it from the stage perspective. Because going into the transcribe of the yin and the yang, we're talking about one and the same. One cannot exist without the other, period.
But he talked earlier and he showed us a picture of the yin and the yang. And he kind of went into a little bit of details about what those things represent. And, you know, the masculine aspect of that symbol has a small dot of feminine energy there, and the feminine aspect of that symbol has a small dot of masculine energy there. And he was talking about how before I've said that I hate to see certain masculine traits in women. No, it's not that I hate to see certain masculine traits. I hate to see masculine traits manifested in a woman, because the actions, the acting out of masculinity makes me, even though I'm looking at a full-fledged woman, it makes me think of a man. And since I'm not attracted to men, I'm not attracted to an over expression of masculine energy in the person that I'm dealing with or dating. I'm not attracted to that at all. And see, here's the thing: nature always seeks homeostasis. It always seeks equilibrium, always. So if a man and a woman is together, you've seen this in your life, and if the woman is extremely masculine, then you're gonna see that 9 times out of 10, the man is gonna be more feminine. He's gonna be more. He's gonna have the perspective of happy wife, happy life. His woman runs everything. Or it could be the opposite of that. Maybe he was just feminine and she has to step up on her being masculine. But there must be a balance where he is able to step into his roles that nature gave him and able to express more of that masculine energy. She is able to express less of it and actually step into the roles that nature gave her by expressing her feminine energy. That is where that balance comes in those aspects and from that perspective. Now, to me, what y'all are calling emotional thinking is not necessarily emotionalism. And if I'm wrong, you can correct me, because that's what I'm hearing from y'all. For me, emotional thinking is intuition. Whenever you start having those intuitions or thinking intuitively or operating off instinct, that's when you're dealing with emotional thinking. It's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. See, knowledge is the learning. You know, I talked earlier about the scales of information development that I wrote. And in those scales, I break down the 5 stages that our mind will get to. Everybody don't get to the highest stages, but we start with data, then information, then knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Those are the 5 stages in that scale. Data is simply the math that we're all talking about. It's the math in nature all around us, even if you're not aware of it. It's that math when it's not expressed, when it's not categorized, when it's not codified. That's what data is. Information is that math, that data recognized, then codified. It's what E talked about earlier when he said that when we're trying to control it or make sense out of it. That's what information is. When somebody recognizes the math and then the pictures you showed us, they draw representations of it and a desire to codify it for us, for it to make sense out of it. Then knowledge is when you're able to take that math and then utilize that math to transform your reality, to change things in your environment. That's why they say knowledge is power, because power is the ability to act. Knowledge is when you can take that information codified, that codified data, and use it to transform your reality or to change things in your reality. Those are the differences between the data, the information, and then the knowledge. Wisdom is when that knowledge becomes habit, when it becomes a part of who you are, period. And wisdom is what I think y'all mean when you say emotional logic. Because wisdom, when was the last time you took out time to think about how you was going to pee? You have been urinating so long that you don't even have to think about the act of urinating anymore. It's not needed. It's not necessary. It's not a requirement, because you've done it so long, it become a part of your nature. Most sociologists, and a good place to read this is Robert Greene's Mastery, also Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point, where they say that it takes 10,000 hours of study of anything to become an expert, where it becomes second nature. That thing becomes second nature. That second nature is wisdom. It's when wisdom is when your knowledge becomes your habit, so much to the point that it comes with so much ease that it's almost like pissing. And that's what y'all are talking about, I believe, when you're talking about emotional logic, but it's not necessarily emotionalism. See, emotional people, we all have emotion. But an emotional person, somebody who makes their decisions off that emotion, is someone who's basically out of control. They're out of sync because they feel an emotion, they act on it. There no matter if it's a right or wrong thing to do, they don't weigh anything. And emotion is not about weighing anything. Motion is about feeling and then operating off of feel. I used to date a sister and we talked and I tried to explain this principle to her and told her that and this was an argument that went nowhere because she could not comprehend what I was saying. But I told her that she had committed an activity that I thought was 100% incorrect. And she committed an activity that I thought was 100% incorrect. And I told her how stupid it was, how foolish it was, and how she shouldn't have done such a thing. And she said that she couldn't help it because she felt it. And if I feel it, I have to do it. And I was like, no, if she don't operate off her feelings, then I was saying her feelings had no value. I was disregarding her right to have emotions and feelings. No, I was disregarding your belief that you have a right to act on every emotional little twinge that comes your way. That's insane to think that you're supposed to act on every single thing you feel. You feel it, and I'm saying then you have to weigh your options on how you're going to respond to that feeling. That's what I'm saying. That's why I say I've never seen a decision that needed to be made with emotion. Emotions lead us to the decision, but we have to weigh the decision. And the process of weighing is called being rational. That's the root of the word rational, ratio. And ratio means to weigh out mathematically. That's what the word literally means. So now, if you can show me, you told me to give you an example of a decision that needs to be made emotionally. I can't because I don't believe it exists. Now, you can give me an example, if you can, of a decision that needs to be made with emotion, if that's what you believe exists.
Well, I know I gave an example. It was a movie example, but it's one that people make.
And I believe that was off. See, I disagree 100% with that aspect of the movie. Even the fact that his strength came from his love for a woman, I disagree with that because see what you're doing now is you're handicapping man. Man cannot be his strongest unless he has the love of a woman. Now, I love women, and I'm not saying women are discounted and not necessary, but you are not a complete being if you need the love of somebody else to make you completely who you're supposed to be. I disagree with that. And that was just some love stuff that Hollywood gave us because all people in their action movies and their horror movies, they want to see that love story. You can see it. That's what that was.
Let me give you the argument I think I tried to make back in the day, is that it was in essence one and the same, whether he saved her or saved the world, because what I saw happening, taking place, is that balance. What Neo recognized is the masculine in him would not exist without the feminine in her. So therefore, if he did not save her, it's like not addressing my other self, of the other side of who I am. So without that is without me. So therefore, he needed to basically re-bridge the connection of his essence. And I think that's where what they're showing. It's not the emotional aspect of love. What it is the recognition, if even going back to the example he gave with the yin and yang, is knowing that in order to deal with reproduction or the secretion that I talked about, then you have to be able to replicate. In order to replicate, that means it takes that man and that woman. And so therefore, and to deal with the existence of the next seeding or the next generation, I have to have this. That's how I took it. Not to say that's where the director was going, but that's how I took it when it came to that, is that what I'm doing is I'm saving my other side. Without my other side, there cannot be a replication. So that's how I looked at that. Now, let me say this before we move forward. Let me address this anyway, so that people that watch this video know what we're dealing with. Because of scientific misconduct, most people generally operate through belief of self as opposed to knowledge of self. So what we're addressing is the fact that most people operate through the belief of self, again, as opposed to the knowledge of self. So we're showing how there is a basic difference between in believing your image of what you are versus the knowledge of what you are. And so that goes into the whole idea of balance of being. is so that we can comprehend, form an analysis, a synthesis, and then a result as it applies to what we are, which is why I also came back and I said the association, the unification, and the replication or replication. So without breaking down my accent. So emotion and logic, that's what we're getting at as we spin back and forth between those two variables. That's what we're getting at. So recognize that too many of our people operate off the belief of what they are and how they perceive themselves versus the knowledge of themselves, which also goes into one other definition, and then I'll let y'all jump back in, that we have to address. Direct perception is the act of whether you're talking about under, inner, or overstanding without the use of thought. Because I think in our last video, we started talking about how thoughts drift. So I did want to make sure that people are aware of, once you are able to, should I say, deal with your higher self and your higher being and your higher balance, then direct perception comes in. And through that, you don't need thought. You don't need thinking. Going back to what Psych is talking about in regards to even dealing with the repetitive cycle of something, to where it becomes what I call muscle memory as it applies to martial science. So through muscle memory, it is not necessary to think anymore as you produce. So you're able to produce through that direct knowledge. And through that direct knowledge or that direct perception, we are able to operate. And we operate at that point in automatic mode or autonomous mode. So that same thing applies to how we take data in, information, and make wisdom of it. Now go ahead.
And before you jump into that, hold on, let me clear my throat right quick. All right. Now let's go back to this. We talked about we're steady juxtaposing man and woman between logic and emotion, and man represents the logic aspect and woman represents the emotional aspect, which I don't necessarily fully all the way to agree with. But let's look at this. You talked about the aspect of the movie The Matrix, when he made the emotional decision of saving self. If what War is saying is correct and that's symbolism, then again, that's not an emotional decision. That then becomes a logical decision, because there is no existence without my complete self. So that becomes a logical decision, not an emotional one. The emotion led me to here. Now my logic has to choose what is the wisest thing for me to do that will give me the greatest results over time. And one of the problems with Black people, and one of the ways we have constantly been defeated consistently over time, is the fact that most politicians, advertisers, and most people know that most Black people think emotionally. We make decisions with emotions instead of logic. Most people ran to vote for Biden and ran to vote for Kamala because Kamala was Black, and Biden had her running with him, and they made an emotional decision. Most people that wanted Biden and Kamala to be in office have no idea of their political policies, don't know anything about them. They just know that emotionally, I don't like Trump. Emotionally, I want to see this sister with the pearls and the chucks. Let's go. And that's the way most Black people make decisions, is with emotions. And I believe that is a flaw, an error, a fallacy. I believe there's a fallacy. Now, the ancient wise teachers, we'll see it consistently. The ancient wise, matter of fact, I'm gonna use this example. I'm gonna use Moses. Why? Because he comes from one of the three major Western religions. Most people think they know who this guy was, and I think it'll apply here. In the story of Moses, we're told that, and it's important to know that Moses worshipped an African god, and I can get into that later if we need to. But in the story of Moses, we are told that Moses, he split the Red Sea. Really, in the scripture, it was Aaron that did it, his brother. But Moses they split the Red Sea. Symbolically, this represents what we're talking about right now. This represents left brain thinking and right brain thinking, not necessarily emotionalism or what y'all call emotional logic. It represents the ability to separate my intuitive thinking from my mathematical thinking. That's the splitting of the Red Sea. And then him bringing the Red Sea back together once his enemies were trying to follow him was his ability to synthesize the two types of thinking. See, most people are either more left-brained than right or more right than left. The master builder has gained the ability to stand at the balance, stand at the harmony. We see the same story in the Quran when Moses is talking with Allah in the Quran. And he had basically learned his teachings and his lessons from Allah. And then as he had learned all his lessons, then Moses asked him now, as Brother Ward was talking about earlier, the secrets. Now teach me the secrets. Teach me that higher learning. So Allah told him, you think you ready? All right. And he gave him instructions to go to the place where he can get that higher learning. But he told him to get him a canoe, get him a companion, get a fish in a jar. And he told him to go to the section in the water while the fresh water and the salt water meet, but it does not mix. So the water is supposedly coming together, but they're not mixing together. One part is fresh, one part is salt. Here it is, we're talking about that balance, or that division between the two types of thinking. So Moses gets in his canoe and he's going down the river. And as he's heading down this river and he get down this river, the fish jumped out of the boat. He didn't notice it. So he keeps going. Now he's getting upset. He's like, man, we ain't gonna never find this place. Man, I'm hungry. He gets hungry during this journey. He tells his homeboy, man, kill the fish, cook it, let's eat. His homeboy's companion say, oh man, surely it was Shaitan that made me forget to tell you. But the fish been jumped out the boat. Moses say, world, that's what we're supposed to stop at. So he say, let's retrack our steps. So they go back to the place where the fish jumped out. And right there, they see Al-Qadir. They see the servant of Allah, Al-Qadir. Al-Qadir in Arabic means the green one. And he is the one who had the secrets, the higher knowledge. Now, I'm not going to go into detail in the story. I just want to break down the symbolism and what that symbolism meant and what it represented. In this story, the place where the salt water and the fresh water meet but don't mix is what we are talking about. We're talking about that emotional thinking, and we're talking intuition, what I call emotional thinking, and not emotional decision making, and logic, that mathematical type of thinking. The master teacher resides at this place because the master is able to balance the two. His spiritual mind, along with his scientific mind, he's able to have balance there, and that's where the master grows. And that's who Moses was looking for, the master. That's who he was looking for. In this story, the canoe represents Moses' religion or his philosophical base that he thought from. Most people have it. Whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, whatever it is, whatever your base is, most people have it. And at this point, in that boat or that religion that Moses had is what allowed him to travel through this sea, looking for higher learning or looking for higher logic. That fish represented his common sense in this story. And his common sense, which was a freshwater fish, jumped out at the part where they got the fresh water. And that's what he was supposed to be paying attention to, knowing that this is what I was looking for. This is the place. So in all of these stories, we always find the master standing at the balance. The master has the ability to be in harmony with both sides of his thinking or his mind. But what we have to know is there is a importance of being able to put prioritize these things, put these things where they belong. Not saying emotions are less important than logic. Not saying logic is less important than emotions, but they have a role to play. And if we put them in their right role, they both become extremely valuable to us. In their wrong role, they lead us astray. When we start doing our thinking with our emotions, I guarantee you, show me somebody who does their thinking with their emotion, I'm going to show you someone who's self-destructive. I'm going to show you someone who's destroying themselves. Show me someone who has not learned how to balance their logical thinking with those emotional feelings, and I will show you someone who could be cold-hearted and so calculating that they'll eliminate entire populations because it just simply makes sense to add to my power to do so. So I understand the need for the balance, but we have to understand where that balance is supposed to be at and what roles these two different things are supposed to play for us.
Let me say this, and then I let E jump in. I think what we're failing to portray to the audience is the fact that I don't believe that we're addressing emotions or logic on that point. I think what we're actually talking about is, again, what I refer to as scientific misconduct, which is the dysfunctional operation of emotion or the dysfunctional operation of logic. Most people are not operating through the correct concept of their emotional body or their logical body. So therefore, if my emotional body in itself is dysfunctional or my logical side is dysfunctional, then you're going to have a dysfunctional end result, which goes back to why I was saying the idea, like even when you got into and you talk about secrets, the deal is a person's ability to take something in and make good use of it, then has to apply to their ability to secrete that so that they can see that same position or that same pattern to the next being or the next cycle. And if I'm not capable of doing that, then all I am is a consumer. See, now we get into the difference between how you say a builder, or what I would say is a constructor. The difference between a constructor and a consumer or a destructor. So with most of our people being so dysfunctional, all they know is destruct. So if I am a destructor and I operate through dysfunctional emotion or dysfunctional logic, then my end result is going to be a dysfunctional result or ending. And so I think the problem is again, this is why I even talked about or introduced the concept of direct perception, because too often, and this goes back into one key point that you said in the last video, Brother Syke, when you started talking about the thought drift, because most people perceive the concept of thought or the concept of the interpretation of something coming into them or entering into their mind as an original thought or something that they came up with, not recognizing that a lot of times this goes back into what I refer to as intrusive projections. Things have came into them and affected their ability to have functional emotion or functional logic. So therefore, if I am fed nonsense, I'm fed misinformation, or I'm fed illogical sequences, or I'm fed linear thinking as opposed to being able to be non-linear, then my result in my interpretation and my ability to be able to deal with the subjective realm as well as the objective realm is going to be flawed. So the idea of my emotional track and my logical track are dysfunctional. So I'm not in my right phase, whether we deal with my emotions or my logic. And so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a being that is out of balance, which is why we had, going back into that title. If a being is out of balance, that also means that their organs or their organism as a whole is out of balance. So therefore, their logical and their emotional is dysfunction. And if it's dysfunction, it will be on the path of destruct versus construct completely, or should I say misconduct, or not able to deal with the intake and the outtake. So what are we talking about? The secret or the secretion, both being one side of the equation or one side of the coin, they can't equal out. Going back to one of the things that we talked about off in dealing with algebra, that equation can't equal. The right side and the left side are not in balance because it's dysfunction. So it don't matter which side we're on. If you're dealing with a dysfunctional being, if you're dealing with a dysfunctional precept at that point, then the end result is not going to ever equate, whether we talk about logic or emotion. And I think that's the thing that we need to make sure the people recognize, is their ability to comprehend, form an analysis and a synthesis, and a result, going back to the mathematics, is not going to be correct. So they can't even properly calculate, which means they can't replicate an answer. Because I get on the drawing board or write down 1 + 1 and I'm gonna come up with 4 or 5 or 6, and then I'm gonna go back the next day and I'm gonna come up with 7 and 12 and something else. I can't even replicate. Why? Because I am dysfunction. If I am dysfunction, then my math will not be correct. And so therefore, the input, output, or the left, right, the yin and the yang, all that stuff is just completely out of balance. Go ahead, E.
Well, I'm just still waiting for Sykes' definitely, what is the opposite of logic?
My definition of what is the opposite of logic.
Yeah, what is the opposite of logic?
Well, the opposite of logic would have to be illogic.
Oh, that's easy.
Opposite. I mean, that would have to be. If
Opposite
logic is rational thinking,
What,
if logic, what?
the opposite of up is not up. Yeah, but what
The opposite of up is down. The opposite of hot is cold.
the opposite
I'm
of
not going to say
logic
the
is,
opposite of logic is emotion, because I don't necessarily believe emotion is the opposite of logic. The
so
opposite of
what is the
what?
opposite of emotion?
The opposite of emotion would be no emotion, non-emotion. Because remember, I said earlier, you and I are coming at this from a different point of view. You believe that emotion and logic are polarities of each other. And I'm saying I don't believe that they're necessarily polarities of each other. You know, that'd be like saying that let me think of a good example for this. I can't think of a good example, but I don't believe that there are polarities of each other. In this conversation, and this is where you and I will go to war consistently on, is I do believe that there's a hierarchy here, as opposed to what level we're dealing with this at. And I believe that logic takes a higher ranking in this army of self, in this community of self, when we're dealing with decision making. That's logic's responsibility. It's like trying to say, it's like sending a pilot. It's like sending a pilot to do the sniping and sending a sniper to fly the plane. You know, they're both in the military, but they've both been trained for different things, and they are good at what they do. But if we're trying to make the sniper be the pilot and the pilot be the sniper, we're not going to get the results we want. But if we let logic make the decisions, and we let emotions give us an understanding of how we feel about these particular things, and we allow them to play their parts, then we're on point. If we start trying to feel with logic, we're off. If we start trying to decide with emotion, we're off. We're off. Because the decision, this is what a decision is. This is what a decision literally is. And I love etymology. So this is what a decision is. So the word decide, we break it down, D and side. D means to bring down. Side means to kill, to eliminate. That's what the word means. Homicide, suicide, genocide. This word means to kill. And to go deeper, side literally means to cut. So, you know, they didn't have no guns or bombs back then. So when the word was created, side of killing meant through cutting. So D, we have an infinite amount of things that we could possibly do today. We made a decision, all three. Hold on, let me make this point, and then I'm gonna pass the mic back. All three of us made a decision to sit here and do this video. By making that decision, we took ourselves out of the infinite possibility of all the different things that we could have been doing. We brought it all the way down, and if we was bringing it down out of the sky, we was consistently killing off every other possible thing that we could have done, until we got to the point that we made a decision to sit here and do this video. That decision was mathematical. It was based on a ratio. It was mathematical. It was not emotional. It was mathematical. And it leads back to what I'm constantly saying about what logic is and its role and its part that it plays in, and it's supposed to make decisions. We're supposed to utilize it for decision making. You know, that emotional part of us, it can be tied more to the physical body, to the physical part of ourselves. Many of the ancient masters in ancient times, they call it the animal self, or the religious people call it the worldly self. When we look at scripture, we see that human beings are made out of scripture says that God made human beings out of two basic things. It said that God grabbed the dirt of the earth and formed the human being's body. So that's the first thing that the human being is made out of. What is the other thing that the human being is made out of? Brother Wall, anybody, ain't nobody getting in on this, or y'all this my diatribe right here.
It's your diatribe.
Well, the other thing that the human being was made out of was God's actual spirit, God's breath. It said that God blew his breath into the human being and made him a living thing. So the human being, the individual, The indivisible duality is two things. It's a physical thing and a quote unquote spiritual thing. It's an earthly thing and it's something else that you can't necessarily see. So that emotional body, that emotional man is tied to that physical part of ourselves. And it gains more and it gains precedent almost over everything else. Because like I said in the last video, it's what we see the most. It's what we feel the most. It's what we have the most contact with. And it's bigger. The physical body is actually bigger than the physical brain. The physical body, the things that we feel with, is actually bigger than the mental body. It's actually bigger as far as our ability to see it goes. So we always get this thing precedence over everything in our life. But the truth is, all of these things we have to purify ourselves in order to raise to that higher level of consciousness, in order to manifest that God within through utilizing our logic and our rational abilities to purify out the negligence that comes to us through our emotions and our sensations. Because a lot of times the things that taste good, they feel good, that makes us so happy are not necessarily the best things for us. And that's where the logic comes in, because logic is not just making a decision. Logic is making a mathematical weighed out decision. That's what makes something logical. You know, we can make decisions all day, but what makes it logical is that it simply makes sense, is that it weighs out. That's what makes it logical. 2 + 2 is 5. That's not logical because it does not weigh out. You know what I'm saying? The weight of that does not manifest itself properly. It's only logical when it makes sense, when it manifests itself properly. And that's how we manifest God, not through the being in a supremely emotional state. And to add on this, and I'm gonna shut up. Boy said earlier about being out of misaligned emotionally and logically. Well, here's the thing, because you have negative emotions and you have positive emotions. I'm not saying bad and good emotions. I'm not saying bad and good. I knew y'all finna go to shake your head and all that when I use the term negative and positive, because there's a polarity there. You have emotions that make you not as happy, sadness, anger, grief. And then you have emotions that make you a little bit happier, that put you on a more positive note, like happiness, love, you know what I'm saying? And I can prove that some of these emotions are negative and some are positive, because some of these emotions, like anger, for instance, anger makes the brain secrete cortisol. Cortisol is poisonous. Once cortisol is secreted, it makes you feel stressed. That cortisol has to get out of the body. That's why when you go get a massage, the target areas are the lower back, the hamstrings, and the back of the neck, the trapezoids. The reason why is because cortisol that does not flow out of the body, and usually the best way to get rid of cortisol once you have it flowing through your body is to attack. Go into straight barrel animal mode, attack and murder something. Since we live in a civilized society, we're not doing that. So we're getting stressed out and then not releasing the cortisol. So it's getting trapped in those major spots I talked about. You go get a massage, you be like, oh my God, that feels so great. Or you do yoga or stretch and be like, oh, I needed that, because you just pulled the cortisol out of your muscle and allowed it to flow to your lymph nodes and then flow out of the body like it's supposed to. Otherwise, it's poisonous. That negative emotion brought forth a negative response, which is why I say it's negative. Smile. Think of something happy and watch endorphins be secreted through the body, which is a completely positive response, which makes you feel positive and actually starts the process of healing parts of you. So that's why I use the term, there are negative emotions and there are positive emotions. But go ahead, I'm gonna drop the mic on that.
So where does intuition reside on your hierarchy?
You say, where does intuition reside?
Where is intuition? You got logic at the top. Where is intuition? Actually,
at the very top of the hierarchy, I got supreme consciousness.
Okay, short of that.
You want the hierarchy?
No, logic on down. Because you mentioned intuition, yeah, and you mentioned logic reigning over those things. Where does intuition fall in there?
Intuition and logic are on the same path.
Okay. Yeah. So how do you tap?
Go ahead.
How do you access intuition?
What do you mean? How do you access it?
Well, it's like I learned years ago, everybody's psychic. Everybody.
Okay.
It's a matter of developing the skills to tap into it.
Sure
How do everybody is intuitive?
Yeah.
Everybody. Because if you understand intuition, it comes from that other side, that unseen, that
Yes.
you feel it. How do you access, develop, and use intuition?
And see, here's the beautiful thing here. I like you said that. You know, you're a pretty sharp guy. I like you said that. Now, here's the beauty. Here's the beautiful thing about intuition.
I've been practicing.
Here's the beauty of it. Here's the beauty of intuition. Because I talked about it earlier in the scales of information development. Data, information, knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Wisdom is almost as supreme as understanding. Wisdom is right next to it. There is no wisdom without intuition. Wisdom is when your knowledge, which is information that you have learned how to use to shape your environment. Wisdom is when your knowledge becomes intuitive. That's what wisdom is. When you're not, hold on, I'm answering your question. I'm trying to answer your question a little bit. It's when your knowledge becomes intuitive. It's when you don't even have to think about it. When I was in construction carpentry, I used to have to pull out the book, pull out the tape measure everything, strategize, boom, 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 to build a bench. There was another guy in there that had been building benches so long, he didn't have to use any of these things. He just grabbed the wood to stuff. He could eyeball this thing, put this thing together, boom, he had a bench. Cooler than mine. See, he had been building benches and things with wood so long that it has become an intuitive process for him. And it's kind of like back in the day when War was teaching us martial arts, self-defense, and he was constantly telling us no style, and we couldn't comprehend that idea. See, War was talking about being a martial artist from an intuitive perspective, what Bruce Lee taught. He said, War was telling us it would take us too long to train you out of a style if I start by training you in a style. We were steady saying, we can't train in anything if you don't give us a style to train from. We couldn't comprehend it. We couldn't comprehend that. War was trying to tell us to be intuitive, to flow with it. And this, what I believe is where intuition comes from. It comes from the consistent and constant practice of something, of a thing.
So through your definition, what you described, intuition is an external result. You get it from practicing something.
No, intuition is you're born with intuition. You're born. Okay,
then if you're born with intuition, then you getting the tape measure and measuring over and over again is a practice on how to tap into something that's already existing, something that already dwells within.
Yes.
Yes. So again, that intuitiveness, you're relegating or making it subjugated to the logic, correct? On your hierarchy, right?
No, that ain't what I did. That's what you're doing. What you're doing.
You said logic is the way that we have to make our decisions. That's the supreme, that's the be all and end all, not the supreme. Now I ain't talking about that area at this point, but as far as us making a decision, logic, right?
That's logic position. That's his role.
Okay.
That's what it's there for.
So
that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that's what it was created for, to play that role.
So what is intuition in regards to logic? You said they're opposites, but if logic is the way, that's what it's there for, to do that. That's his goal. How can they be opposite if one of them has a more definitive role? In that definition, you're still subjugating intuition to logic.
I'm actually not saying that it has a more definitive role. You're saying that because in your thinking, whenever a decision is being made, that is the role. That's it. If something
that's what you said. You're supposed to use logic to make decisions.
That's what I said.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is that you're saying that since logic is making a decision, that whoever or whatever makes a decision is the supreme king. That's what
I'm saying in that context of making a decision, logic and reasoning. I'm not talking about life. I'm talking about making a decision, deciding things. Logic is the way.
That is logic's job. Yes.
Okay.
But it isn't saying that logic it's the supreme thing because logic is doing its job. The heart's job is to pump blood through the body, and it's extremely necessary. It's not
Right.
saying that it's more supreme than the brain because that's his job. And I think we'll be insane if we try to take the heart out of doing its job.
If
That's
logic,
logic's job is to make decisions with. That's why we was given it. Without decision making, why do we have logic?
if logic's role is to make decisions, and logic's opposite is intuition, wouldn't intuition also have the job of making decisions?
No, no.
Okay. So what is the job of intuition?
Let me ask you a question. If you're married, you have a wife, y'all are equivalents in the house, correct?
Okay.
Are you the supreme and she your underling? How does it work? I don't know. Right?
Okay. I'll roll with that.
Are you the supreme? I mean, just tell me. I don't know. I've never been married.
Oh shit.
Brother War.
Yeah, ask somebody who's currently married.
If you're married, you have a wife. Are you the supreme in the house and she your underling? Or do y'all have an equivalent relationship in the household? Is there certain things that she does that she calls a shot on, certain things you do that y'all call a shot, that you call a shot on, but when y'all come together, y'all represent a balanced team that governs the household? I mean, tell me how it goes.
I would say what it's supposed to be is yes, we represent balance, but at the same time, see, we got to go back to the word I keep using in regards to the conversation of hand. Dysfunctionality. Whether we're dealing with emotion or logic. If the household is dysfunctional, then the two parts will be out of characterization with one another. Therefore, I will be, gravitating or operating too much within her realm, and she will be operating too much within my realm. So as it applies to even going back to what you was talking about, and I say this, the heart and the brain, because oftentimes we think of the heart as being emotion and the brain as being the logic. Keep in mind, the heart is what's dealing with the current, and the brain is what is setting the synchronization. And I still like to go back to that Coltrane example that Brother E threw up as it applies to that. Now, when you go in between notes as you're playing notes, that's dealing with a pattern, right? But your ability to recognize that pattern would not happen unless there was a synchronization. That would be that logic or that brain. But at the same time, the flow or the energy or the ka, and dealing with kaba or ba-ka, however you want to say it, as it applies to me being able to supply the bread or the current, wouldn't be there unless I had that heart. So I do see these as being two parts of the opposite parts of the same coin. I do see the emotion and logic, but what I see is that when you're dealing with a being that is out of balance, then the dysfunctionality of that being out of balance may cause something to their emotions to come across where they should be operating from more logic, or vice versa. But at the same time, if I am dysfunctional, then my emotional body has been infused with so much processing, going back to natural versus unnatural diet, so to speak. Whether we talking about mental, physical, spiritual, if my diet is not proper, then obviously my intuition can't control or can't operate between the two. Because I would like to say, going back to what he talked about intuition, intuition comes into place, and that's used that same example that y'all talk about with the martial science. When you are thrust into a combat zone, or thrust into a combative situation, mental, physical, or spiritual, that you are unfamiliar with, your intuition kicks in and is able to flow between the logic and the emotion so that you adapt and overcome and be able to deal with that situation. Intuition is being put in a position where you do not recognize your environment. Whereas the one you was talking about, Psych, in terms of the recognition of pattern is different than intuition. because intuition deals with that relationship between the seen and the unseen. So we do have to make sure that those people watching this video recognize the difference between a secret and a secretion. And I don't think too many people get that. Reason being is your ability to take something in and make sense of it. You know, that's being able to adjust and deal with the secret. It's like going into the understanding, understanding, and overstanding. Let's just break that down in a basic concept. Understanding is being able to drive a car. Understanding is being able to work on that car if that car breaks down. Overstanding would be able to reproduce or build a car of your own. So most people can relate to understanding. And when you ask them, hey, do you know what that is? And you point to a vehicle, they say, yeah, that's a car. You know how do you know how to operate that car? Yeah. Well, what does the car do? It gets me from point A to point B. But they don't necessarily know the understanding or the overstanding of that vehicle. They can't reproduce that vehicle. And that goes back into that secretion that I'm talking about. Because if I am a dysfunctional being, then I only know how to consume. In other words, all I know how to do is put gas in that vehicle and drive that vehicle. I can drive it, I can drive it, I can drive it. I'm consuming that vehicle. But I don't know my vessel to the point of being able to be at balance with my being. And that's why I talked about from the standpoint of dealing with this subjective and the objective reality, a world of consciousness. If we are not able to know thyself versus dealing with the belief of self, then the best we can come into is the understanding. But the understanding and the overstanding may actually be out of my sphere of consciousness. And if it's out of my sphere of consciousness, the discussion that we're having, just as it relates to emotion or logic, don't even make sense to the listening audience, because they are dysfunctional. If you're dysfunction, your emotional logic and your logical emotion can't even mesh to be able to comprehend the discussion that we're talking about. So part of what I think we want to make sure people grasp is that if you are dysfunctional and your path is on the path of just consumption, because you haven't been able to operate to the point of the intuitive as it applies to knowing how to deal with self-determination or self-preservation for that matter, then you need to get that in order first. How do you deal with that alignment that Brother Syke talked about earlier? How do you get back in alignment? Because if you're out of alignment, then what are we talking about, the emotional body or the logical body? It's not gonna produce. That decision that was made or decisions that get made are going to be based upon only your ability to recognize options, which has to do with a limited perception. But you will never be making choices because you are not free. And that ties back into our first part of our discussion when we talked about the use of what's referred to as drugs. What are we dealing with, psychedelics, or are we dealing with lower forms like weed? Most people can't fathom the use of psychedelics as it applies to what they are really there for. They deal with a chemical that's already being produced in the brain. It has to do with being able to separate the senses and actually give the senses a different channel or direction to reach the brain. So therefore, your sight becomes a smell, and your smell becomes a sight, and your hearing becomes a taste. When you do that, then the direction or the path to the brain becomes what's referred to as scrambled, to a sense. Well, what this causes us to do, if we're in the right state of consciousness, it causes one to be able to identify through the same channel a different means. So then you are able to recognize that the world, then the perception that you have been brought to see, is not the real reality or an expanded reality. So then it opens up your consciousness. If you're in the right headspace, if you're in the wrong headspace, or you are dysfunctional, which most people that are in dysfunctional states don't know that they're in dysfunctional states. And see, that's the key. If I don't know that I'm operating dysfunctionally, then I may go down this path of this knowledge or this wisdom, so to speak, go down the path. I'm not saying I'm wise, but go down the path seeking wisdom, but I'm not going to seek it through the right or the proper channels because I don't know how, because I'm not equipped with that sense of intuitiveness to be able to do so. Yet alone talk about being able to be deal with any form of intuition. So I do want to make sure we draw a distinction between intuition and intuitiveness as it applies to that, and dysfunctionality as it applies to being out of alignment.
I want to add something. I got to do my best war rendition right now because I got to do the egghead scientist thing right now. Because I think it's important because because when we're debating this, and I think we all kind of have different definitions for these terms we're using, and we're talking about different things, you know. And I'm gonna break this thing down from psychology. I'm gonna break this down psychologically. Then I'm gonna give you, if I don't take too long to do it, I'm gonna give you my mind map. I'm gonna give you the mind map real quick, E, so you can know from where I'm talking from. See, I believe, and E, feel free to correct me. I believe that's why I started using the word intuition, because as we talk, the longer we talk, I started feeling that E was calling intuition an emotion. I think he was talking about emotional thinking as intuition, and I believe that that's a fallacy. See, emotion, let me define some of these things. Emotions are simply, and emotions are not, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but they're not equal across the board to every human being. Because what a punch may make one person who is a sadomasochist feel good, a punch will make me feel insulted, you know. And so one thing we got to do is understand about emotions is our emotions, or our emotions themselves, or have been for lack of a better word, dictated to us. You wasn't born necessarily feeling how you feel about everything that you feel. You wasn't. It's based on experiences that you had in life that you developed that particular emotional response to that particular situation. And emotion is nothing more than your pituitary gland secreting a hormone. That's it. And depending on how you feel about that thing, based on your past experiences, it determines which hormone will be secreted at that point in time. The two primary ones would be cortisol and endorphins, based on how you feel about that particular thing. And this response, this biochemical response that the human being has, was important for the human being's survival. If you was walking down the jungle 1,000,000 years ago through the wilderness, and you saw a bush shake, and you say, "Oh, I wonder what that is." And E walked over there to the bush and pulled aside a branch, and a lion jumped out, knocked E upside his head. That's why he's missing half of that hair up there right now. And E caught out running and somehow evaded the lion and survived. What has happened is E has developed a programmed emotional response to shaking bushes. So the next time E is walking through the wilderness and a bush shakes, E's heart goes to pumping real fast. Cortisol starts secreting through E's body. E is filled with fear and the need to protect himself. E catches out running even before he sees what's in the bush. So these responses and these emotional responses have become a normal part of E's makeup. You wasn't born with your emotional responsive thing. That's what emotional is, period, point blank. That's what emotional is. I've already described what logic is. Logic is the ability to think rationally, to think mathematically, because the root of the word rational is ratio, and the word ratio means to weigh out. The only way to weigh anything is with mathematics. So logic or rationality means to think mathematically, to put it on the scale and to weigh it out and to make sure it comes back the way it's supposed to come back. If somebody comes to me and say, "Hey, this 36 ounces, I put it on the scale and it's coming back 28, something's wrong. Something's wrong. He hit me for 8 somewhere. You know, this thing supposed to come back 36, you know, and I know y'all don't know what the hell I'm talking about, but I'm just using that example of making the point that I'm trying to make when I'm talking about logical thinking and emotion. Now, here's the thing about intuition. Intuition is not an emotion itself. It is a feeling, but it's a way of thinking in itself. but it's not always at the front part of the brain. It's not readily available to us as logic is. It's not consistently available to us. And that's why many of the great wise men and wise women went through the processes of fasting and meditating and these practices in order to bring that part of thinking to the forefront of their being, so that intuition can be a normal response to dealing with situations and things. So it could just be that. Now, here's the thing about certain part of our instinctual mind exists with us. A certain part of it exists already. We're born with it because God, nature, evolution, whatever the hell you want to call it, didn't trust that you wasn't so dumb, didn't trust that you wasn't so stupid that you wouldn't what the hell is that? Didn't trust that you wasn't so stupid that you wouldn't get yourself killed before you became an adult and then procreate. So it needs you to survive. So there are certain things that you're born with like any other animal. The difference between the human and other animal species is that we also have the ability to be logical. And that took the need for instinct to be our number one thing that made us do what we needed to do. That took the need for that to be pushed to the side. It has its positive and its negatives, because by us being so logical and gaining the ability to think our way through things, a lot of times we start ignoring our instinctual self. We start ignoring that part of self, and therefore a lot of time when that instinct could actually save us or help us get to a conclusion faster, we no longer have access to it. And that's kind of what Ward talks about when he was trying to get us to understand about training martial arts without developing a style. It slows us down a fraction of a second by us having to think through the next move instead of our body just responding, instead of our body feeding on the energy from the opponent. And that's when we're dealing with intuition and things of that nature. So, and I'm gonna give you the mind map real quick. And I know I'm talking a lot. The mind map, at the top of the mind map is supreme consciousness. Now, you know, I've said this a million times that I believe the only thing that ever existed was what people call God, and that everything else is manifested from God. So the role and the goal and the whole part of this play that we call life is for the human being to recognize that and actually become God again. So supreme consciousness is there. Supreme consciousness is always talking, and we have access to all knowledge that has ever existed on the planet. We have access to it. We just got to learn how to listen, and we got to tap into ourselves. In the movie, we talked about movies a lot. In the movie I Am Legend, if y'all have seen that movie, in the beginning of the movie, Will Smith's daughter and his wife is getting on the helicopter, getting ready to fly away to safety. And as his daughter is getting ready to get on the helicopter, she makes a butterfly symbol with her hands to her father, and he makes it back to her. And then when they fly off, a news helicopter gets hit and it crashes into his daughter's helicopter, and they die, blow up right there. And he like, Lee. So through the movie, he walking around by himself. Anyway, at the end of the movie, when all the zombies coming after Will Smith, and he has the formula for healing the zombies. He has the formula needed. It's in his blood. He has the formula needed to heal them, but he didn't understand it. He didn't know it. He's been trying to come up with the formula for healing them, but the formula, the key is in his blood. Anyway, when they come for him, he locked himself in this protected room, and one of the zombies is running his head into the glass, running his head, and as he hit the glass and the glass starts to crack, it makes a butterfly symbol. And right then he snapped, you know, and the woman asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm starting to listen. I'm listening." And what he means by that is he started tapping into that supreme consciousness. So supreme consciousness is at the top of the mind map. The supreme consciousness is the consciousness of God, the creative energy of the universe, whatever you want to call it. We have access to that supreme brain. It's there. Most people, majority of people on the planet will never tap into it, but supreme consciousness is at the top. Next is will. After will is logic and intuition on the same field. Under logic and intuition is emotions, sensations, and it's a third one. I forget what it is, though. It'll come to me in a minute. And here's the thing. Sensations, for example. A lot of times people mix emotions and sensations up with each other. They're not the same thing. Sensation is if you touch some ice and you feel that it's cold, or if somebody stabs you and you feel the pain. These things, these sensations are nothing more than how particular outside stimuli feels to us. You know, one of the things that I used to always stress is that we actually only have one sense, which is touch, because every other sense that we have operates off touch. You know, when we first started this video, you was in the dark and we told you, hey, your video looks bad. You need to turn some light on. And the reason why you needed light, because we only see light. If it was pitch dark in this room right now, we couldn't see anything. But our eyes emit a for lack of a better word, a ray of light to a certain distance. This is what we call our field of vision. That light that comes from our eyes touches other light. And that light that our eyes touch reflects off objects, and that's what gives us our sight. That light feeds back into our lens of our eyes. It feeds back into the occipital part of the lobe of the brain, and then boom, we see. Same thing happened with the ears. The sound hits the eardrum, boom. Same thing happened with touch, with everything that we call our senses. That's the same thing is happening. Without that touch, there is nothing. There's no sight, there's no hearing, there's no taste, there's none of that. None of it exists. So we have to understand the roles that these things play, what they are and where they come from. As I just explained what emotions were, what sensations were, and what logic is. And this is my whole argument. My entire argument is that logic was developed, created, evolved, whatever term you want to use, for decision making. Because here's the thing: while intuition is great, and I will submit this. I will humbly submit to this. Intuition, once it's primed, is a better decision maker because it's faster and it operates off instinct. But we don't always have ready access to intuition. So the decision maker that we need to use, especially when we have time to weigh things out, is logic, not emotion. Emotion is never a good decision maker. And I'm differentiating emotion from intuition here. Intuition is a great decision maker. When I was a child, and I'm going to pass the mic because I know I've been talking a long time. I'll never forget this because I can't explain it, but I know what it was. When I was a child, I put a big board on a merry-go-round. For some stupid reason, you know, kids can't think that well. Underdeveloped brain, the brain doesn't fully finish maturing until you're 25 years old. So a child doesn't make wise decisions. So here it is. I done decided that just sitting on the merry-go-round alone wasn't good enough. It wasn't fun enough. I put a big board that extended probably 3 feet past the merry-go-round. I wanted to sit on that and swing on the merry-go-round. To me, that would make it funner. So here it is. I'm sitting on this darn board that's extended out past the merry-go-round, and I got my friends spinning that board, and I fell off of it. Of course I fell off of it. There's nothing holding me on it. I didn't think that far ahead. So I fell off the board, hit the ground, boom, with the raise up. And right as I raised up, the board was coming back around right there for to split my head into, and instantly, without even thinking about it, I simply laid back down and that board, boom, went right past me. I'm talking about I know the way I explained it seemed like I had time to think, bro. I didn't. It was instant. My body, my intuition knew to get out the way. It just did it. It knew to boom. And same thing happened with fighting. I had been fighting so long, a lot of times without thinking, I can't even tell you where it come from. But a lot of times in a fight, I can see a person's punch coming. And that's why I weave so well or block so well. I can see it coming. And I can watch a fight. And if I ever watch a person fight, even when I was on my vacation, as he called it, it were times I would watch people fight and I could know, okay, I could get him. But it was times that I would see dudes and I'd know that, okay, I can't stand up under him. And the reason I knew, I couldn't see his punches. He'll throw a punch and he'd hit the other guy and I didn't see the punch coming. And when there's too much of that going on in the fight, then I know that here's a guy that moves and operates at a level that I haven't developed yet. And I think this is what we're talking about, the difference between intuition and logic. This is what I think we're dealing with. That means that I was done making my point.
I don't know if you're gonna jump on it. Well, I see intuition and intuitiveness as two different things from that standpoint. Because to me, when we talk about intuition, I look at intuition as being the bridge between vessels. So to me, when you talk about that, that is the separation of my being versus the everything else, the essence of my environment or nature or my relationship between that. So to me, that intuition, the greater my intuition or the more in tap I am with my intuition, then now we get into what you go back into and talk about supreme being. Whereas intuitiveness to me has to do with the habitual patterns or my ability to be able to navigate between myself and my environment. So that will go into the combative aspect of what we talk about physical, mental, and spiritual in regards to my relationship with that environment. But I don't see them as two as one and the same. I see them as different existing within different planes of a hierarchy. So the intuitiveness or intuition to me is a higher level of consciousness, whereas intuition is something that can be learned through repetitive action as well as exposure to your environment. And even on that point of exposure, I also want to talk about experience. So this is another play on words, but I do want our listener to think about this. Experience, if we slow that down, it's the external spiritual essence, experience, the external spiritual essence. So this is the spirit's, basically the spirit's way of representing or dealing with a physical plane as it applies to that. So that is what an experience is. It is how you come to a physical manifestation or a physical example or physical feeling or physical touch, as Psych would say, in a spiritual body or spirit being. So from that standpoint, when we talk about that intuition, is being able to exist or recognize how to tap between worlds or between existence or between planes. So to me, that's what intuition is, because as I learn to adapt and learn to read my intuition, then I can exist outside of the time space density sphere. So therefore, to give you another example of a concept of intuition, would be going into what some people call deja vu. In other words, here you go, I'm already aware of an event supposedly before it actually happened. So that means my consciousness has escaped time, but yet this pattern that I'm about to see is a pattern that already came before. So that intuition has tapped into the fact that it's existing beyond a linear perspective. That's why I say we have to be able to be non-linear in our operation, but that goes into that intuition. Whereas an intuitiveness would just simply be my ability to be able to navigate and come to an awareness, utilizing my senses and utilizing my past experience, which is that external spiritual essence of navigating and of relating to everything else. So as it applies to a physical combat scenario, the anatomy of the body moves and flows a certain way. The more I am in tune with my vessel, the more I know how to also see that opponent and feel that opponent ability to be in tune with their vessel. So if they're not as in tune with their vessel as I am with mine, then I know how to navigate that combative situation to a better degree than they do. Therefore, I'm able to execute a move of whether it be defense or offense or both one and the same, to be able to end that conflict, and not have to deal with it or bypass that conflict. So that would be that intuitiveness, which is my ability to tap into my vessel. Whereas to me, intuition is tapping in between worlds from that standpoint. That's just my thought on that.
Let me say this before we get ready to close out, because we've been on 2 hours, and I guess we'll have to come back and finish it on another one, because I do also want to build on the difference between the dark builder and the light builder, and why I think the logic and emotion conversation is so important. But he had said earlier about the practice, when I was talking about the practice, when I was talking about carpentry and how it becomes second nature. And that's because of one of the things, and y'all may disagree with me about this, but I like to deal with things concretely. I like to science a thing up. So one of the things that we understand is why, quote unquote, practice makes perfect. Why? And the reason why is that the brain specializes. The brain has to use energy for operating processes. And anything that you're not doing on the regular, the brain automatically says, you know what, that might not be necessary for our survival. So the brain literally kills the neurons for that activity. That's why you might find yourself, you used to be great at spelling in school, hadn't been reading, hadn't been spelling, and hadn't been writing too much in the last 20 years. And you try to go back to it like, man, I used to be pretty nice at spelling. What happened? What happened was the brain got rid of those neurons for spelling. And it's why I always accredit Elijah Muhammad with this. It's why he made it necessary in his 120 lessons in the Nation of Islam for you to memorize every lesson before you got to the next lesson. You had to memorize that lesson and be able to quote that lesson verbatim. What that does is, and I've seen it firsthand when I was in prison, what that process does is it takes people who are basically uneducated. It takes people who are basically unlearned and don't have a lot of confidence in their ability to grasp information. Once they prove themselves that they can memorize long trails of information like that, they start getting more confident. But what also happens is the brain creates a neural pathway just for memory, just for memorizing information. The brain creates, so the process of practicing an activity, the brain creates neural pathways for that activity. It's saying, oh, this must be needed for our survival because he sure is doing it a lot. Let's create a neural pathway just for this. And once that happens, that thing becomes second nature to you. That's why it becomes your wisdom. That thing becomes intuitive to you. And it's not bringing nothing outside of yourself because those neurons are there. They are in you. You just got to know how to manifest them. You know what I'm saying? So unless one of you brother want to add to that, we're going to go on and close out for the night and come back at this again next time. And like I say, I want to build on the dark, what I call the dark builder and the light builder, or we can call it the reactionary builder and the revolutionary builder. You know, because when people hear words like dark and light, they think I'm talking about color. Or they hear negative and positive, they think I'm talking about bad or good. And I'm not. I'm talking about the polarities, how these different aspects can be utilized.
Well, I want to say that what you're talking about in regards to adding to your discussion is the difference between direct, what I refer to as direct perception, and indirect perception, or that of learned perception. Because direct perception means that you didn't have to, you don't need thought, versus dealing with your experiences. So from that standpoint, one, is operating through the intuitive world, versus the other one is operating through intuition. So I want to end on that, because to me, there is a vast difference. And it'll be going back to the fact that, whether y'all believe it or not, I knew E was going to refer back to yin and yang today. And that had to do with me tapping into my intuition versus my intuitiveness, because I know E, but how did I don't know E well enough to know that he was going to hold up a symbol of yin and yang. That only could come through my ability to be dealing with intuition. So it's navigating between the worlds and being able to draw into connections that are beyond my physical ability to reach out onto something. So there is a difference on that. So people, as you build upon the subject matter of balance of being, look at things from the perspective of knowing that if we are operating through dysfunctionality, and we operating through the lenses and through the process of consumerism, we need to get to the point to where we are able to be builders. Like Syke keeps throwing out there, that jewel needs to be able to resonate within what you are. Be a builder. If we can't be builders, then everything that's being discussed today between Brother E, Syke, and myself is coming at you only from the stance of being able to understand or being able to drive that vehicle. But if you are to learn your vessel, and you'll learn the importance and learn how to really utilize your vessel to its fullest, physical, mental, or spiritual, through that trifactor, then you must be able to embody who you are, which goes back to knowledge of self versus simply being a belief of yourself. You have to have knowledge of yourself. And that's how I want to end that part.
And I'm going to say